Well, hello there. Welcome. So in this video, I wanted to give a few quick thoughts on a comment that I got on the previous video. And the previous video was basically a video in which I regurgitated some very commonly expressed frustrations when it comes to online dating from the perspective of a guy. And with that video, I thought I made it pretty clear, but my intention with that video wasn't to complain about my own subjective frustrations. I have those, but my intention with that was to just sort of, again, it was just general stuff, like why I feel that a large portion of guys tend to struggle with online dating in particular, but just more so dating, and it's becoming, generally speaking, for the average typical fella, it's becoming more difficult to have success with. And regardless of whatever you define success as being, like whether it's like casual stuff, just trying to get laid, or if you're like looking for something more long term, and like marriage and stuff, I think that it's generally becoming more difficult for the average fella, however you define that, because there's a lot of like going about defining above average, below average, but just generally the average typical dude is having a harder and harder time as time goes on with attracting a mate and maintaining some, sexual fulfillment or whatever. I mean, which, from my perspective, what does that look like? How do you maintain sexual fulfillment? Because it's just you're constantly chasing. You're never really satisfied for any real length of time. But, and if I was to talk about my own frustrations with online, I think a lot of it has more to do with addiction and just feeding into bad habits and becoming a worse person as a result over time. And that's not to say that I have lots of success, or I've had I haven't really. But when I have had some levels of, I feel like with online dating, I'm more likely to allow those more so bad habits to kick in, and I'm more likely to continue to see someone for bad reasons, and that to blow up in my face. So a lot of it just has to do with my own stupidity. My own frustrations have a lot to do with I'm just dumb, and a lot of people made assumptions in the comments, and that was a fair one, because there were people saying, like, if you're struggling on there, it's probably your own fucking fault. You seem relatively, and that's, fair enough. But this comment that I wanted to give a few thoughts on, it was like the claim that the reasons as to why most men on online dating in particular are struggling has to do with the fact that their standards are too high. They have too high of they have unrealistic expectations when it comes to finding a partner. And I feel like that applies to some guys out there, but I think the majority of the time, and I feel it to be pretty funny, the fact that I uploaded a video before that one entitled "The Standards of Many Men," in which I basically went in detail as to why I feel the opposite is far more close to being the problem. I think that guys over time are having lower and lower standards, especially sexual standards, like when it comes to more casual stuff. And this leads to more and more guys, just messaging just any female with a pulse, and having that be their, like, not only primary source of trying to find a sexual partner, but their only source is like online dating. And that's a terrible, for many reasons, and it's just this sort of cycle, because you have lots of guys that are relatively good looking and relatively successful, and again, like how you go about defining that, just messaging any female with a pulse, just sending out messages in mass to just countless female, and this leads to just like more and more females tending to view a large portion of guys as being these just really desperate, needy, horny, pathetic creatures. And if you look at I looked at like Tinder experiments, and if you look at those and see just how many thirsty, desperate messages the average female tends to get on there, like how could you not blame them for having that happen to them? Like their perspective, like their perception of many guys, just gradually becoming more and more like, yeah, the average guy is a a desperate, horny, down bad animal, you know? And how could you blame them for coming to that conclusion when you see just how... So yeah, I would wager, I would argue, as I did in the other video, that that's far more close to being the problem. I think many guys have too low of standards, like way too low. And this is the case when it comes to sex in general. And then guys also, this sort of carrying over to more long-term stuff, because that's how many people get into long-term, relatively long-term relationships. Because, many guys will have like virtually no standards when it comes to just sex. But when it comes to getting into a relationship and committing to a person and like, introducing them to friends and family and those sorts of things, then they're going to be more likely to have higher standards, because then there's more pressure. There's judgment and there's other factors that leads to like a greater sense of concern with how you're being perceived. Because that's the other thing with online dating, you don't really have that. I think you have more guys that are like, they're sexually active, but they're having sex with women that are just have like nothing going for them, and they're rather unattractive and they're rather unpleasant to be around. And you have guys that are just having sex with them, with the females that just have like nothing going on. And I think that's more likely to occur with online dating. Because if you're like going out, or like, because used to, a lot of the time people would just sort of like meet through mutual friends or acquaintances and that sorts of stuff. And now it's more so, like, you can just go on the apps, and if you're just a desperate, horny animal, as many dudes are, you're gonna lower your standards significantly, just out of like, oh, I need to scratch this itch. I need to, indulge in this tendency that I know is terrible for me, and it's gonna, cause me to feel shitty about myself, and then that becomes a cycle too. I don't know. I just wanted to ramble. Just wanted to give a few quick sort of thoughts on that, because I did find it to be kind of fun, and it got quite a few likes. The comment itself, I don't know if I even really mentioned the comment specifically, but it was the claim that like the reason as to why so many guys are struggling on there is because they all just want like supermodels. They all want... That was the words that were used. The reason as to why, guys are just going for supermodels, and they don't want, the average guy isn't willing to settle for the average girl. And if you believe that's like the primary problem as to why many guys are struggling on there, I disagree. I strongly do. I strongly disagree. I think the opposite is far more akin to being the issue. Many guys have no standards, no self-respect for themselves. And I struggle with that, if I'm being honest. Having respect for myself. I'm trying to get better about it, but, it can be hard. It can be difficult, to develop a sense of self-worth. And that's a terrible source to get it from. Like how many matches you can get, how many attractive women you can have sex with. I think that's a pretty unfulfilling source of self-worth. And it's not going to last, And it leaves you feeling empty and silly. Like, what did I just do that for? Did I really just spend that much time trying to scratch that itch, and then that's what it felt like to scratch it? I finally scratched it, and that's what it consisted of? And you just feel like a silly person at that point. But yeah, just like a greater, like the more, when I used to spend a good amount of time on there, my goal alignment became more and more skewed over time, significantly. Like in the way in which I was spending my time and what I was like striving towards, and it was really out of whack. But yeah, those are my general thoughts. The summary being that I think guys should raise their standards and try to put themselves out there in person, rather than trying to hook up with ladies off of the internet. I think that's contributing to more and more of the ladies having just a greater number of what they perceive to be options. And maybe they are options. And they are options in a sense, like sexual options, but then it leads to more and more ladies thinking that they have way more options in terms of like the more long-term sort of stuff than they actually do. And that, you know, if you're not interested in the long-term stuff, that's, you know, you can set that aside. But many are. And I think that's just a recipe for disaster, because you end up, your perception of what you can attain becomes quite skewed, because you start with the more short-term stuff, and then you think that you could, and then it just, okay, so this video ended up going on for way too long. I'm sorry about that. As always, feel free to let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below about anything that I've said in this video. And hope everyone's having a fantastic Saturday. Goodbye.